I have seen this confuse some of the most disciplined people who sit across from me. They come in with food journals, step counts, and pages of blood pressure readings neatly written down. They are not smoking. They barely touch alcohol. They go for their walks every day, even when the weather is not ideal. They have cut back on processed food. Some of them have become so careful with salt that dinner barely tastes like dinner anymore. It tastes like obligation. And still, the blood pressure numbers stay there, stubborn as ever, like a front door that will not open no matter how many times you turn the key. So they look at me and ask a question I have heard more times than I can count. What am I missing? Sometimes they ask it with patience, sometimes with real frustration, and sometimes with that quiet fear that does not need many words. Is something wrong with me? Is my body just wearing out? Am I doing all of this for nothing? I can hear the disappointment behind the question, because for many people this is not just about a number. It is about effort. It is about hope. It is about wanting to believe that doing the right things should lead to a clear reward. If that sounds familiar, I want you to stop for a moment and really hear what I am about to say. High blood pressure does not always mean you have failed. It does not always mean you have been careless. It does not always mean you have been eating badly or living badly. And it does not mean your body has suddenly decided to betray you for no reason. I have taken care of people who looked healthier than everyone around them, healthier than their friends, healthier than their neighbors, sometimes healthier than the person they live with, and their blood pressure still stayed too high. That is because blood pressure is not controlled only by the habits people can see from the outside. It is also shaped by signals deep inside the body. Quiet signals, hidden signals, chemical signals, hormonal signals, messages moving in the background all day long, messages to the kidneys, to the blood vessels, to the nervous system, whether you are standing in the kitchen making breakfast, sitting in traffic, folding laundry, or trying to sleep. And when one of those signals gets stuck in the on position for too long, the body can keep pushing the pressure higher even while your lifestyle looks clean, careful, and healthy on the surface. That is the paradox people are living with, and it is one that almost nobody explains in a way that feels human. You can be doing many things right on the outside and still be fighting an internal signal that keeps working against you. You can be disciplined at the grocery store, faithful with your daily walk, careful with your meals, and still feel as if your body did not get the message. That disconnect is what leaves so many good people feeling confused, discouraged, and quietly ashamed when they never needed to feel ashamed in the first place. And once you understand that, the whole story starts to feel less mysterious and a lot less personal. Because for many people, the real problem is not just what is sitting on the plate, it is the signal behind the pressure. It is the message the body keeps receiving again and again, hour after hour, without enough rest. And in the next part, I want to show you the hidden driver most people never think to blame. For years, most people have been handed the same simple explanation. If your blood pressure is high, it must be because you are eating too much salt. So what do? They get strict, really strict. They stop adding salt at the table. They push away canned soups, packaged snacks, restaurant food, bottled sauces, deli meats, even favorite foods they used to enjoy without thinking twice. I have seen patients turn their kitchens into little low-sodium laboratories, reading every label, measuring every portion, trying their best to do everything right. And still, the blood pressure barely budges. That is usually the moment people start to lose heart. Because if salt is supposed to be the problem, and you have already worked so hard to remove it, then why is the pressure still sitting there? Here is the part most people were never taught. For many adults, especially after 60, the real problem is not only how much salt is coming in. The real problem is whether the body is being told to let that salt go. And that brings us to a hormone that almost nobody thinks about when they think about blood pressure: insulin. Now, when most people hear the word insulin, they think of one thing only: blood sugar, diabetes, sweets, bread, carbs. That is where the mind goes. But I want you to think wider than that, because insulin reaches into far more than sugar. I have watched this misunderstanding trap good, careful people for years. They tell themselves, my glucose is not that bad, so insulin cannot possibly have anything to do with my blood pressure. But the body is not that simple. When insulin stays high too often, it starts sending a very specific set of messages through the body. First, it tells the kidneys, hold on to more sodium. Do not release too much of it. Second, it keeps nudging the nervous system into a mild state of alert, almost like an engine that never fully settles into idle. Not panic, not a full-blown emergency, just a quiet, steady pressure in the background. Third, it affects the blood vessels themselves, making them less willing to open and relax the way healthy vessels are supposed to. Now let me put that into a picture you can carry in your mind, because this is the point where many people finally say, ah, now I see it. Imagine your circulation as a highway. The blood is the traffic flowing down that road. Salt is like the number of cars entering the highway. Your kidneys are the exit ramps, the places where extra volume can leave the system. And insulin? Insulin is the traffic signal controlling those exits. If you cut back on salt, that can absolutely help. Of course it can. It is like sending fewer cars onto the highway in the first place. That is a reasonable step, a smart step. But what happens if the exit ramps are still half shut? Traffic still piles up. And that is very close to what happens inside the body. You may be taking in less sodium, but if insulin is still running high, the kidneys are still being told to conserve. The exits do not open the way they should. Fluid stays trapped. Pressure rises. The whole system stays crowded, even though you are trying so hard to lighten the load. So yes, salt matters. I am not telling you it does not matter. But salt is only one piece of the story. Because for many people with stubborn blood pressure, the more important question is not just, how much salt am I eating? The more important question is, why is my body holding on to what it should be letting go of? And once you understand that, another uncomfortable truth starts to come into view. Some people who look perfectly healthy on the outside are carrying the exact internal problem that keeps this signal switched on. And that is what I want to show you next. And this is where a lot of people get blindsided. They sit back, almost a little offended, and say, "But doctor, I'm not overweight." I've heard that from men whose shirts still fit the same way they did years ago, from women who proudly tell me they have stayed the same size for a decade, from people who walk every morning, cook most of their meals at home, and look, to everyone around them, like the very definition of healthy aging. And that is exactly why this problem slips past so many people for so long. Because body weight and metabolic health are not the same thing. This is one of the most important things people were never clearly taught. Not all body fat behaves the same way. There is the fat under the skin, the kind you can pinch with your fingers. That is subcutaneous fat. Then there is visceral fat, the more dangerous kind, the fat tucked deeper inside the belly, wrapped around the organs, especially the liver. And visceral fat is not just sitting there quietly like extra padding stored away in a closet. It is metabolically active. It sends out signals. It fuels inflammation. It interferes with the way the body handles insulin. I often explain it to patients like this. Subcutaneous fat is like boxes stacked in the garage. Visceral fat is like smoke drifting through the control room. One mostly sits there. The other starts affecting how the whole system runs. And that matters because when the body stops responding to insulin the way it should, the pancreas has to work harder behind the scenes. It has to pump out more insulin just to keep blood sugar looking normal on paper. So from the outside, the lab results may look fairly reassuring. The glucose may not look alarming. The A1C may not raise eyebrows. And that is exactly where people get lulled into a false sense of safety. They think, my sugar is normal, so my metabolism must be normal too. Not always. I have seen many patients whose blood sugar looked acceptable while their insulin was likely staying elevated most of the day, quietly pushing in the wrong direction like an engine that never fully settles down at a stoplight. They were not obviously obese. They were not sitting around eating junk all day. They were not doing the things people usually blame. But inside the body, the signal was still stuck in the wrong position. And when insulin stays high, the chain reaction we talked about earlier starts playing out whether you can see it or not. The kidneys hold on to more sodium than they should. The nervous system stays just a little too switched on. The blood vessels do not loosen and relax the way healthy vessels are meant to. And the pressure begins to rise, not always with some dramatic warning, but quietly, gradually, in the background of everyday life. That is the hidden metabolic trap. You can have a normal weight, a respectable-looking lab report, and still be under the kind of metabolic strain that keeps blood pressure climbing. So if you have been comforting yourself with the thought, I look healthy, so this cannot be happening to me, I want you to stop and sit with that for a moment, because some of the most stubborn blood pressure problems do not show up in the mirror, in your clothing size, or even in the first lab number someone glances at. And once you begin to understand that, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. What is happening in daily life, day after day, that keeps this insulin signal turned on from morning until night? Now let's bring this down to earth, because I do not want this to feel like one of those abstract hormone discussions that sounds interesting for a minute and then disappears into the air. I want you to see the sequence clearly. I want you to feel how this actually plays out inside a real body, in real life, over real days and nights. The problem is insulin staying too high, too often, for too long. The mechanism is the set of instructions that high insulin gives to the body. And the consequence is blood pressure that stays frustratingly, stubbornly high, even in people who are sincerely trying to do the right thing. First, high insulin tells the kidneys to hold on to more sodium and more fluid than the body truly needs. And that matters because blood pressure is not only about whether the arteries are stiff or relaxed, it is also about how much volume is moving through the system. More retained fluid means more pressure pushing through the same pipes. I often explain it to patients this way. Imagine trying to push extra water through a garden hose that is already stretched tight. You do not need much imagination to know what happens next. The pressure climbs. Second, high insulin keeps the nervous system slightly turned on. Not panic, not a racing emergency, not the kind of fear that makes your heart pound in your throat. More like driving with your foot resting just a little on the gas pedal all day long. The car keeps pulling forward, the engine never fully settles, and the body is much the same way. It never completely softens, it never fully lets go. That quiet internal push may seem small, but when it continues hour after hour, day after day, it is enough to keep blood pressure elevated in a very steady way. Third, high insulin makes the blood vessels less willing to relax the way healthy vessels should. Under normal conditions, blood vessels are meant to open and soften when the body needs them to. That flexibility is part of what protects the heart, the brain, and the kidneys from too much pressure over time. But when that relaxing response is blunted, the vessels stay a little tighter, a little narrower, a little less forgiving than they should be. So now think about what you have. Extra fluid being held in the body, a nervous system that is still lightly pressing the accelerator, and blood vessels that are not opening properly. That is not just a random temporary spike. That is a recipe for pressure that stays with you. And this is one reason mornings can be so discouraging. I have seen this pattern more times than I can tell you. One patient comes back to mind immediately. She was disciplined, organized, and truly trying. She walked every day. She cooked at home most of the time. She hardly ever ate restaurant food. She took real pride in how little salt she used, almost as if willpower alone should have been enough to solve the problem. But every morning, her blood pressure disappointed her. Not once in a while. Not after a stressful day. Almost every single morning. And when we finally looked more closely, the problem was not hidden fast food or obvious overeating. It was the constant insulin stimulation from eating little things through the day and then eating too late at night. She was going to bed with the wrong internal signal still running, and by the time she opened her eyes in the morning, her body was already starting the day under pressure. That is the part I wish more people understood, because it changes the whole emotional weight of this conversation. This is not your body turning against you. This is not your body being lazy, broken, or ungrateful for all the effort you have made. This is physiology doing exactly what it has been instructed to do. The problem is that the instructions are wrong, and once you see that clearly, the next step starts to come into focus. We have to look at the daily eating patterns that keep insulin switched on from breakfast to bedtime without ever giving the body a real chance to reset. Now we come to the part that catches people by surprise more than anything else, because on the surface it all sounds so harmless. Eating clean does not automatically mean your body is getting the rest it needs. I have seen people build diets that look wonderful on paper and still keep their insulin elevated from the moment they wake up until the moment they go to bed without ever realizing it. They are not living on drive-through food. They are not sitting on the couch with candy bars and chips. In many cases, they are doing exactly what they were told was healthy. And that is what makes this such a frustrating trap. It does not feel reckless. It feels responsible. It feels disciplined. It feels like the kind of eating pattern that should be helping. So let me walk you through the 3 eating habits I see most often in people whose blood pressure stays stubbornly high. The first is grazing all day. This is the person who says to me, "But I'm being careful. I don't eat big meals. I just have something small every few hours. A little yogurt in the morning, a handful of nuts before lunch, half a protein bar in the afternoon, some fruit while standing at the kitchen counter, a cracker with peanut butter before heading out the door." Nothing sounds extreme, nothing sounds irresponsible, but the body does not respond to that by saying, "Oh, this was only a tiny bite, no need to do much." The body hears something very different. It hears, "Food is here again. Insulin, get back to work." That is the part people miss. Every time you eat, insulin rises. And if you are eating every 2 or 3 hours, insulin never gets much time to settle back down. It is like leaving the lights on in every room of the house all day and half the night, then acting surprised when the electric bill stays high. Or like never fully hanging up the phone before it rings again. Eating small amounts more often can sound smart and controlled, but in some people, especially after 60, it becomes a quiet way of keeping the pressure system turned on all day long. The second habit is liquid calories. This one fools a lot of good people because it comes wrapped in a healthy image. Smoothies, fresh juice, protein drinks, meal replacement shakes, even products marketed as heart-friendly, energy-supporting, or designed for older adults. People look at these and think, "This is not junk, this is good for me." And to be fair, some of these drinks may contain nutritious ingredients. But the problem is not just what is in the glass. The problem is how the body handles it. Liquid calories move in fast. They are easy to drink quickly, easy to underestimate, and they often push insulin up faster than people realize, without giving the same solid, lasting fullness that a real meal can provide. So what happens? First, insulin rises quickly. Then, because the drink often does not keep someone full for very long, they eat again anyway. Sometimes with the drink, sometimes an hour later, sometimes by mid-morning when they are back in the pantry looking for something else. Now, instead of one rise, you have overlapping waves. I have seen patients start the day with a fruit smoothie, then still sit down to eggs and toast, then wonder why they are hungry again before noon. The body never got a true quiet stretch. And then we get to the third habit, and in many people this is the one that does the most damage of all, eating late at night. I want you to pay very close attention to this one because this is where a lot of disappointing morning blood pressure readings are born. When you eat too close to bedtime, insulin stays elevated during the very hours when the body is supposed to be recovering, recalibrating, and finally exhaling from the day. That means the kidneys keep holding on to sodium. The nervous system does not fully settle down. The blood vessels lose some of the recovery time they were supposed to have. So instead of going to bed in repair mode, the body goes to bed under low-grade metabolic pressure. It may not feel dramatic. There may be no obvious symptom in that moment. But the next morning, the cough often tells the story. I remember one patient especially clearly. She did not eat desserts. She did not drink soda. She cooked most of her meals at home. If you looked at her habits from the outside, she seemed like the last person who should have been struggling with blood pressure. But almost every night, around 9:30, she had what she called her healthy little treat. Sometimes it was crackers with nut butter, sometimes fruit, sometimes granola, sometimes a small protein snack while watching television and getting ready to wind down. Nothing looked wild. Nothing looked dangerous. But it was enough to keep insulin elevated late into the night. And nearly every morning, her blood pressure greeted her with the same discouraging number, as if all her effort the day before had somehow not counted. That is why I keep telling people something they do not hear often enough. Sometimes the issue is not only what you eat. Sometimes the real issue is when you eat and how often you ask the body to deal with food. That is the hidden lock. Not always the cheeseburger, not always the salt shaker sitting on the table, but the non-stop signal of intake, starting with the first bite in the morning and ending with that last healthy snack before bed, never really giving the body a full chance to come back down. And once you understand those 3 habits, the next question becomes the one that matters most. How do you create enough space in the day for insulin to finally fall and let the body breathe again? This is one of the reasons so many healthy, disciplined people stay confused for years. In fact, the more disciplined the person is, the more hurt, frustrated, and almost betrayed they tend to feel. They look at their routine and see evidence that they should be safe. They see the morning walks they never skip unless they absolutely have to. They see the careful grocery shopping, the time spent reading labels, the smaller portions, the home-cooked meals, the number on the scale that has barely changed in years. They look at all of that and think, this cannot possibly be a metabolic problem. People with metabolic problems look unhealthy. I do not. But I have watched that misunderstanding happen again and again. People judge metabolic health by what they can see in the mirror, by what size clothes they wear, by how often they exercise, and by whether their meals look neat, balanced, and healthy from the outside. And yes, those things matter. Of course they matter. I would never tell you they do not. But they are not the whole picture. A person can look organized, active, and sensible on the outside and still have the wrong hormonal signals quietly running the show on the inside. And one of the biggest reasons this gets missed is that blood sugar can look deceptively normal. That is something I really want you to hold on to because it misleads a lot of good people. Many people think, if my glucose is fine, then my insulin must be fine too. It sounds reasonable, it sounds logical, but the body can compensate for a long time before it finally waves a red flag. The pancreas can keep working harder in the background, releasing more and more insulin just to keep blood sugar sitting in a range that looks acceptable on a lab report. So the numbers come back looking fairly reassuring, the patient feels a little relieved, and the deeper signal pushing the blood pressure higher never really gets questioned. And then what usually happens? Both doctors and patients often reach for the easiest explanation because it feels familiar and convenient. It's just aging. It runs in the family. Some people simply have high blood pressure. And to be fair, there is truth in those statements. Age does matter. Genetics do matter. I would never pretend otherwise. Arteries do become less flexible over time. Family history absolutely can shape risk. Those are real parts of the story. But here is what many people miss. Those factors may explain part of the background, but they do not always explain why the pressure is still stuck right now, in this pattern, in this particular body, despite all the effort being made every day. And that matters, because if the real issue is a signal problem, if insulin is being pushed too high, too often, for too long, then this is not a hopeless situation. You are not powerless. You are not trapped. You are not left with nothing but blame, bad luck, and resignation. You still have leverage. You still have something meaningful you can change. And to me, that is the hopeful turn in this whole story, because in the next part, I want to show you the simple daily reset that can finally give that signal a real chance to settle down. Now let me show you the part I wish more people had learned years earlier, because this is the point where the conversation stops being discouraging and starts becoming useful. You do not need to punish yourself. You do not need a harsh starvation plan. And you do not need to vanish into some extreme fasting challenge for 3 days just to try to get your blood pressure under control. What you need is something much simpler, much kinder to the body, and much more realistic for real life. An insulin-lowering window. What does that mean in plain English? It means giving your body a stretch of time each day when it is not constantly being asked to process more food. A real break, a true pause, a period of quiet. Because when food keeps showing up, insulin keeps getting called back in like a worker whose shift never really ends. But when that signal finally calms down, the body can start doing some of the repair work it has been trying to do all along. So here is the practical reset I want you to start thinking about. Step 1. Stop snacking between meals. If you are eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, let those meals be meals. Let them stand on their own. Cut out the handful of nuts while passing through the kitchen, the few bites of fruit in the late morning, the just something small in the afternoon, the piece of toast because dinner is still an hour away. I know those things seem harmless. I know they feel small. But I've seen this one change make a real difference for people. Because you are not only removing a few extra calories, you are removing repeated insulin signals that keep the body from ever fully settling down. Step 2. Finish dinner earlier. Not right before bed, not at 9:30 in front of the television, not with dessert sliding into the late evening because the day felt long and you wanted a little comfort before sleep. Give your body a clean runway into the night. Give it time to digest, time to quiet down, time to stop working before you ask it to recover. The earlier your final meal ends, the more room insulin has to fall before your head hits the pillow. Step 3. No night eating. For many people with stubborn blood pressure, this is the rule that matters most. Once dinner is done, the kitchen is closed. No crackers while tidying up. No fruit bowl visit at 10 o'clock. No healthy little protein snack. No bites of leftovers while putting things away. I have watched people improve their mornings simply by being more protective of their evenings. Sometimes the most important thing you do for tomorrow's blood pressure happens the night before. Step 4. Keep your daily eating window to about 10 to 12 hours. That does not mean you need to force yourself into some severe 6-hour schedule that leaves you weak, irritable, or lightheaded. That is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about something steady and sustainable, something a real person can live with. For example, maybe you eat your first meal around 8 in the morning and finish your last meal by 6 or 7 in the evening. That alone can create enough space for insulin to come down in a meaningful way and give the body a chance to breathe. And when insulin finally starts to come down, several important things begin to happen. The kidneys become more willing to release extra sodium instead of holding on to it. The body's fluid balance becomes less backed up and less congested. The nervous system starts easing its foot off the gas pedal. The blood vessels become more able to relax and open the way they were meant to. That is how blood pressure starts to improve, not because of some miracle, not because of some trendy trick, but because the body is finally getting a better set of instructions. Now I want you to keep your expectations grounded and honest. This is not a movie scene where everything changes by tomorrow morning. Some people start noticing improvement within a few days. Others need a few weeks of consistency before the numbers begin to shift in a way that is real and dependable. The key is not speed. The key is giving the body the same helpful pattern long enough for it to respond. And one important caution before you make changes. If you are already taking blood pressure medication, diabetes medication, or if you have kidney disease, heart disease, or episodes of low blood sugar, do not make major changes carelessly or assume you can just figure it out on your own. Track your readings. Pay attention to how you feel. Bring your doctor into the conversation. Because when the body starts responding, medication timing and medication needs sometimes need to be reviewed. And that brings us to the final truth I really want to leave with you, because this has never been only about chasing a prettier number on a screen. So, let me leave you with the truth I wish more people understood before they spent years staring at a blood pressure cuff and quietly blaming themselves for a number that refused to move. Chronic high blood pressure is not just a number that flashes on a screen or shows up on a cuff. It is mechanical stress. Stress on the heart that has to push blood forward against more resistance with every beat. Stress on the brain, which depends on steady, protected circulation to keep you clear, stable, and sharp. Stress on the kidneys, which are filtering your blood every minute of the day, whether you are awake, asleep, walking through the grocery store, or sitting at your kitchen table. Stress on the blood vessels themselves, which were never meant to live under constant strain year after year. And that is exactly why this matters so much, because the real goal was never just to force one number lower for the sake of appearances. The real goal is larger than that. The real goal is to improve the metabolic environment your body is living in every single day. It is to help you wake up clearer in the morning, feel steadier when you stand, stay stronger as the years go by, and protect the independence that matters so much later in life. The ability to think clearly, move safely, and keep living your life on your own terms. So if you have been doing many things right and your blood pressure is still high, please do not turn this into a story of personal failure. I have seen too many good, careful, disciplined people do exactly that. They assume they must have failed somewhere. They assume they must not have tried hard enough. They assume their body is punishing them. And that kind of thinking can wear people down in a very quiet, painful way. Sometimes the body is not asking you for harsher effort. Sometimes it is not asking for more punishment, more fear, or more restriction. Sometimes it is asking for better timing, better signals, and a real stretch of rest each day for the pancreas, the kidneys, and the blood vessels. Sometimes the answer is not to push harder, but to work more wisely with the physiology you actually have. That is where change begins. So tell me in the comments, which habit are you going to fix first? Will you stop the constant snacking? Will you move dinner earlier? Will you finally cut out that late-night eating that feels small in the moment but keeps costing you the next morning? And please share this with a parent, a spouse, a brother, a sister, or anyone over 60 who keeps saying, "But I'm healthy, so why is my blood pressure still high?" And one important reminder before we close: this content is for education only. It is not personal medical advice. Please do not stop, change, or reduce your medications on your own. Speak with your doctor, especially if you are being treated for high blood pressure, diabetes, kidney disease, or heart disease, because the safest progress is the kind that is made with the right support.